Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to another edition of the NickelPressTV edition, I should say. We went under a bit of a facelift during the week. We are now NickelPressTV. It sounds edgier. The producers wanted it, so we did it. Week 10 edition, Waiver Wire, start sits. I'm Doug Moore, your host. Joined this week by a very knowledgeable mind. Works for numberFire. You know how much I love numberFire. Joe Redemann, how are you?
Hey, Doug, I'm good. I'm just excited to be on. This is a blast.
Yeah, no, we're 30 seconds in. He's already that excited. So, let's see what happens at the end of an hour. So we'll be talking first, mostly about our recap about the week, hot topics going into week 10. And I would think we have to start with what broke earlier today, probably about 5 or so hours ago, that Andrew Luck will be out at least 2 to 6 weeks. On Sunday, he suffered a lacerated kidney and a partially torn abdominal muscle. Looked like he was finally starting to turn it around, especially after leading them to a win against the Broncos and made them not undefeated anymore. So beyond losing Luck, I want to ask you, Joe, we'll start off with this. What does this have for an impact on, say, the other position players, fantasy-worthy in Indianapolis? What about Dante Moncrief? What about T.Y. Hilton? What about the tight ends? What about Frank Gore even? What are we going to see now? Who's going to gain value, I should say, lose value, or stay in between?
Yeah, it's a mess. I mean, that's the short answer of it. Matt Hasselbeck is a capable game manager. He's shown that. He's done well enough when he's won the past couple times. But, Luck had started to turn it around. Luck was really, making things go. I mean, granted, you had the Carolina game where he was terrible. Everyone was terrible there. But, it's going to impact everybody. I don't think it's going to impact the running game too much. That offensive line is brutal. They're letting everyone through. Gore's not going to get much traction anyways. The only thing I could see it really impacting is any sort of receiving ability that Ahmad Bradshaw had. But, I mean, Hasselbeck's going to be good enough to get it to his tight ends and maybe Hilton on a couple of short crosses. Hilton didn't suffer a ton when Luck went out because he's the slot guy. But I don't know. I think you're going to see Moncrief. I think you're going to see the deep threats diminish a bit with this.
Yeah, we're talking about a 40-year-old journeyman quarterback who, I wouldn't say journeyman, but he's been a journeyman for the past few years. Now, granted, he stayed in Indianapolis, not doing much, having arguably the easiest job in professional sports as making millions as the backup quarterback. But now he's been relied on to play a bit, and now he'll be relied on to play even more. I shouldn't be asking this, but I'm probably going to, especially for those who are listening and are in 2 QB leagues or maybe just that desperate deep leagues. Is Matt Hasselbeck fantasy relevant?
Especially in 2 quarterback leagues, yes. Hasselbeck, actually, if we go into our numbers, I'm a huge metrics guy. Being that I work at numberFire, it's like Scrooge McDuck swimming in a pile of coins, getting to wade through all these spreadsheets. It's a blast. But if we look at quarterbacks this year and look at our metrics, essentially the NEP metric, net expected points, is how much value a player adds to their team, and it does pretty closely correlate with fantasy points. Hasselbeck is the 5th best quarterback on a per dropback basis among those who had at least 40 dropbacks this season. So, I mean, there's Palmer, Brady, and Hasselbeck on a per-play basis. That's good. That's really good. I think he's good enough to start, especially in 2 quarterback leagues if the matchup is right. But you're not going to get the massive 60 attempt games and the downfield throwing. But he's had, if we just take a cursory look at this, 63.8% completion against Jacksonville this year, 62% completion against Houston, 200 yards in each game and a score. That's good enough. And Chudzinski knows how to shape his game plan to his players, the offensive coordinator for the Colts now.
Yeah, we saw him turn, the Browns when he was the head coach. We saw him turn the Browns, I can't remember, I think it was 2013 or 12, with a ragtag bunch, and you couldn't say that even more, into a top 10 offense, I should say. So especially, and it's not to say that they don't have any weapons. They do. They have not Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck's on the sidelines. They have T.Y. Hilton. They have Dante Moncrief. They have Ahmad Bradshaw, who maybe not be fantasy relevant right now, but he's still somebody that a receiving running back is often one of the quarterback's favorite players. So
especially a short targeter.
Definitely, and Matt Hasselbeck doesn't exactly have a six-pack going. He doesn't exactly have the cannons going at 40 years old. We see that more Mr. Clean thing going for him. So it's going to be interesting. I don't see much of a drop-off in terms of what we're going to see at the quarterback position because Andrew Luck really hadn't been doing that well. I think he led in the NFL in interceptions. And, he's, like you said, Matt Hasselbeck, game manager, someone like Alex Smith, who might throw a touchdown or two or maybe have a really good game. Not sure if that will happen, but he's not going to throw a lot of interceptions as, Luck takes a lot of chances. So, yeah, I can definitely see that. I don't play in 2 QB leagues. I don't play in deep leagues, so I know I'm staying away from him. But it's always nice to have that numberFire metric that I've heard about from Joe, who was on the show a few weeks ago with us. So that mystery matrix. We can't spend the whole show talking about the Colts, especially how bad their GM is. So that's another story. Another big injury this week, or this past weekend, I should say. And we got to talk about my Patriots a little bit, and it's not for good reasons. Deion Lewis, who has been a fantasy marvel this season, considering he didn't even play last season, came onto the scene with New England, had been doing extremely well, goes down on Sunday with a torn ACL. He is out for the season. LeGarrette Blount is racking up yards. He's expected to get more touches now in the run game. But the big question is, who is going to get the receiving back role, if there even is going to be a concrete one? Maybe they'll change their game plan. That's what the Patriots do. They change their game plan a lot. So I know for me, I saw Brandon Bolden come in and get 3 catches and 27 yards and a touchdown in relief of Deion Lewis. No other running back besides Deion Lewis and Brandon Bolden at that game had a target in the receiving game. So my question to you is, this has been a hot debate. We've seen James White be talked about, but James White has habitually proven to not produce when we thought he would or hoped that he would. So is it going to be Brandon Bolden? Is it going to be James White? Could they possibly sign a running back? Jonas Gray is available, even though he's not much in the passing game, but we saw Blunt get signed last season. Pierre Thomas was just released. What to make of this situation, Joe? You got to help me out here.
Yeah, I think we can rule out a straight free agent being super impactful. I know that we saw Blunt get signed last year, and he just after that. But Blunt's a different breed. Blunt's a really strong power back. He's always been a talented runner, but he's needed a good system to thrive in, and that was what was provided for him in New England when he signed. So I don't see any of the pass catching backs out on the market, like a Cadet, who is just signed now, but your Pierre Thomases or anybody like that out there. I don't see them coming in and doing much. I think it is going to be in-house. They'll probably sign somebody for depth, but I think it's going to be in-house between White or Bolden, and I think they want Bolden to be the guy. I think they're going to give Bolden the first chance at it. You can see Bolden's been active more than White this year, and that's a big sign. We do a lot of a lot of our psychological game theory testing of how coaches finagle their rosters and all that stuff, but I think sometimes it is best to just look at who's being left available. And Bolden was the only guy who can catch a ball out of the backfield. I mean, you could have, your slot receivers go back there, but he was the last pass-catchable running back left once Lewis went down last week. Blunt, I think, might see a couple extra targets here and there, but we can't count on that. He's not a big pass catcher. I do think that White's got better value. And just to throw a little plug in here, I did write an article about who fills Dion Lewis's void this week on numberFire, so you can find that on numberFire.com. And really the two over the past 2 years, White and Bolden have been pretty similar. I mean, on a per-play basis, they're pretty much negligible on difference. So it could rotate. I think they want Bolden to be the guy first. But if White gets off on a hot streak, maybe we see him seize the job in a Vereen-esque role. I don't think anyone called that when Vereen first leaped into the scene,
Yeah, no, and you brought up a good point. The only thing I will point out with Brandon Bolden is that he is one of the better special teams players. So I've actually talked to some Patriot beat writers early in the season saying, why is Bolden even on the team? He doesn't do much. He's a special teams guy. So that's part of the reason why he's been active much more than James White. Especially if they sign a running back.
I will say though, I think they would have had 4 running backs active though if they thought Bolden couldn't handle the job, and that's a big thing. I think they would have 4 running backs active whether or not Bolden was a key special teamer, and yes, that's the big reason why he's active all the time. But if you think about depth, if one of them goes down, as we now saw, then it would turn to Bolden as the next logical pass catching back.
Yeah, definitely, and I'm not here gonna argue with you and say that Bolden isn't a better back, because I think he is. James White has proven so far to be, a failed experiment by, ultimately, I guess you could call it Belichick. I guess he's the GM.
Right.
But we saw that the Patriots actually have a running back in today, Daryl Richardson. He's a receiving back. And I would have to think that all sort of talk about this will be put to bed if someone gets signed and James White's still a healthy scratch, because it could happen.
Oh, yeah.
We've seen crazier things happen where just for some reason James White is just not. He doesn't have the coach's approval, and he's been inactive I think more times than he's been active, and it's just he's way down. And as much as fantasy owners or fantasy football players want to say, oh my God, I can't wait for James White to do this and do that, you got to be on the field first. And, I just don't think James White has done anything to prove that he is even worth time on a field, let alone be in someone's fantasy football lineup. So that's just me.
It's the Christian Michael effect in a way. It's the Christian Michael effect.
A very, very poor man's version. I have not seen anything close to the Christine Michael version, which I think is almost put to bed now. But maybe all of them are stop putting coal in the train to let the Christine Michael Express keep going. I think they stopped that. So I think that's being put to bed. That's
all I'm saying. I think the James White train and the Christian Michael train kind of like cross over, and then the parties, they have like a nice little get together, and then go on their truther ways. But yeah, it might be that same sort of thing.
And you might want to put in other players like Jeff Janis or even Aaron Dobson or for me Colt Flazera, who I thought was going to be something. There's plenty of players in that train. But I guess to summarize this, I would think that Bolden is the better bet to get first crack at that sort of position or job than James White, who I would not be shocked if he doesn't play on Sunday. If they sign somebody and they keep him inactive. But that's just me. Sort of transitioning into some of the other things, especially the waiver wires. We talked about a little bit, with saying that Bolden is someone worth picking up. I want to bring up a quarterback that he was ridiculed his rookie year, decimated. Nobody liked him, and they thought, oh, this is a failed experiment. And now
I know where this is going.
Yeah, you know where this is going. He's turned into some sort of savant where the Raiders are now, a playoff contender. I know they just lost. I know they just barely lost on Sunday to the Steelers, but they're still, I think, in playoff contention. And that's Derek Carr. Derek Carr, I pulled this information when I was writing my pieces, for waiver wires this week. 11 touchdowns, only 1 interception in the past 3 games. That's ridiculous. He's thrown for 4 touchdowns in 2 of the past games, 2 of the past 3 games, and 3 in the other. And one of them was against the New York Jets, who are supposed to have this iron curtain, so to speak, secondary. But he's made it work. He's got Amari Cooper. He's got Michael Crabtree, who's another story. He's got a solid run game in Latavius Murray. And the offensive line has been playing to a level that nobody thought they would play. But I would have to say that Derek Carr is quickly approaching almost matchup-proof status. And he's someone that I would think in most leagues, if you're iffy on your quarterbacks, like, say, Ryan Tannehill, I would start Derek Carr over Tannehill, let alone leave him on the waiver wires. What about you, though? Am I going crazy?
Would I start him? Yeah, I dropped Matt Ryan in a league for him. Actually, one of the big leagues that I'm in really tight contention in, I dropped Matt Ryan because Derek Carr just has a better floor these days, and it's shocking to say that. I don't exactly know. I don't exactly know why Ryan is struggling as much as he is. I mean, and a baseline of around 15 points a week isn't struggling, but with so many higher upside options out there at quarterback, I'm not willing to let Matt Ryan be the second banana to the Devontae Freeman show. I want Derek Carr, who's slinging the ball everywhere in Oakland. I mean, just past 3 weeks, this league has decimal scoring, but around 24 points, 29 points, and 27 points in this league. It's outstanding for Derek Carr. He's got a great schedule coming up, not against Minnesota, but Detroit, Tennessee's been worse than we think. Green Bay's been leaky, and then San Diego, he's gold for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and he's still available. I pulled these numbers, I think, yesterday, but they could still be true. Still available in a third of Yahoo leagues. So I would think that number is going to, if people thought it was a fluke before, they're going to go and grab him now. Especially, I called him a low-end QB1 this week, which is probably about 9 to 12 range, especially with, Matt Ryan, Phillip Rivers, and Andrew Luck, who was, on bye anyway, out this week on bye. So even against Minnesota, I would still say he's worth starting in a lot of leagues, especially just like you said, he has such a high floor, but he's also got this extremely high ceiling because he's got 2 completely competent wide receivers who both are top 10 in the NFL in targets. And then he's got, Latavius Murray, who not much of a receiving back, but he keeps that run game solid where nobody knows what's the Raiders going to do on offense. And it's just ridiculous. And their defense has been playing better than we expected, which takes pressure off the offense. It's ridiculous. He is performing at a level that I don't think anybody saw coming, and I'm not going to complain about one bit. No, I'm glad you agree with me. Yeah, and I'm glad you agree with me in terms of going and grabbing him. He should be near 100% ownage after tomorrow, I would think. But we can't, unfortunately, spend time talking about Derek Carr, who quickly, for me, is approaching Gary Barnage's love level, which I don't know who's been listening, but Gary Barnage is borderline, my fantasy football soulmate. So got to move away from him a little bit. And we got to talk about some other players, unfortunately. Another guy that I would think a lot of people are going to be going after this week in terms of owning, who has somehow scored in every game this season he's played in. I missed 2 games. I'm sorry, he missed the past 3 games with a concussion. He's scored in all 5 games he's played in, whether he's the backup or the starter. And this week, on a short week, we get the guy starting in front of him is hurt. He says he'll play, but how much he'll play is a different story if he plays at all. Carlos Williams is still available in over 60% of leagues. He ran for 110 yards on 9 carries and a touchdown. And Carlos Williams doesn't have an easy matchup this week. No, he doesn't. but he's still someone who's going to keep getting touches. And could he score a touchdown for the rest of the season? I don't know about that, but he's going to get meaningful touches. And if someone who was a fifth-round pick coming out of Florida State, nobody expected him to do this, just like Derek Carr. But he's somehow doing it. And I would have to think, again, that Carlos Williams is going to be picked up in a lot of leagues, hopefully stay there, except in my leagues where I go and grab him. And, even maybe a flex play this week. What about you, Joe?
I don't even have to look in the spreadsheet that I have to know this number, this stat, but this fact, I suppose. So for a little bit of reference, when it comes to numberFire's metrics, receiving value, because it's so much more efficient than rushing value, tends to outweigh rushing value in running backs. So you'll have bigger receiving scores as opposed to rushing scores. But even with that in mind and the fact that Williams has only 7 targets on the year, he has the highest per play total value for running backs. So you've got Danny Woodhead, Deion Lewis, Shane Vereen, Devontae Freeman, all of those guys. Carlos Williams has the highest per play value among running backs, at least running backs with at least 50 touches. That's incredible to me. Like, you're outpacing Devontae Freeman, who had that ridiculous 4-week span where he was setting records. I mean, you're doing better than Todd Gurley on a per-play basis. He is just lighting it up, and I was an idiot and dropped him in one league the week before he came back because I needed to fill something off of a bye, and I didn't have any other space. But, I mean, especially if LaShawn McCoy keeps dealing with injuries, and we know that he might. He's a thinner back. He's not frail by any means, but he is a little more agility-based, a little more of the elusive kind of guy. Williams is that thick kind of power back who's going to stay, aside from the concussions, which is a totally different matter, he's going to be durable, and he's going to plunge through that line and make plays.
Yeah, and I would have to think as long as Tyrod Taylor is healthy, who is a dual threat quarterback, who again I would recommend picking up in leagues where you can still grab him. It's gonna open up, and this is generic talk here, but I don't care. If you have a mobile quarterback, it's gonna open up your run game. It's gonna open up your pass game because you don't know what's gonna happen. You don't know. I'm not saying he's someone like Michael Vick, but he's someone who's proven to show with his legs that he can run, and he should be, watched in terms of, is he going to stay in the pocket or is he going to run for 10 yards? So I would think as long as he's healthy and not. We've seen that with Alfred Morris in Washington, who's a power back also. He's a straight line type of guy. And when Robert Griffin was there and starting, he was the toast of the town. He was amazing. But then once Griffin started losing effectiveness as a runner, that dual threat quarterback thing took away from the threat of Morris. So teams were able to key in on him. I mean, it opens it up. Yeah, and I don't even know who Alfred Morris is because if he's not relevant in fantasy football, I don't talk about him. So all these people saying, oh, yeah, he's going to be great this season, improved offensive line, a great offensive line coach, most runs attempts last season. But there we go. I mean, he's not even worth owning in this. But so maybe you have a crush on Carlos Williams the way I do on Gary Barnidge. Who knows? But another guy that a lot of people, I even forgot about this guy. A lot of people, like Christine Michael. It hasn't been that long though. But a wide receiver who was drafted by a team that, is just stagnant offensively. And despite his immense talent, but limited route tree, I'm throwing a little bit of draft talk in there. Like I said, I'm a pretend member of Draft Twitter. So, this guy was immensely talented, but he's been relegated to mostly a sort of a low role, a 5-set role, where he only comes on in certain situations and then doesn't even do much, really. And I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. I've been a little sneaky with who I'm trying to describe. It's Dorial Green Beckham. You know, when you have a coach, an interim coach that comes in and says, you know, one of the first things, we're going to get Dorial Green Beckham involved more, that's a good sign. And we saw that pay off this past weekend. I'm looking at it right now. He led all the 10 seed wide receivers with 10 targets. Now, granted, that was with Kendall Wright out, but we don't know when Kendall Wright will be back. He had 77 yards as well and 5 catches. Now, granted, he didn't have a Miles Austin game where he came on for 251 yards or something like that. I remember that game. I watched it. But, you know, he's still somebody that has the talent and with the proper quarterback that can put up good numbers. Is he going to put up, you know, Odell Beckham numbers? I don't think so. But is he someone worth owning and someone who could be a worthy flex play given the matchup? I would have to think so. I would think he's going to keep getting more looks. I think he could lead the rest of the season for Titans wide receivers, or even maybe besides Delaney Walker in targets. So for me, I think he's got a ton of upside, but a really low floor as well in what he does. But I think he's still worth owning. What about you, Joe? Dorial Green Beckham, give me the skinny on him.
Yeah, he's a guy that, I'll be honest, most of the numbers don't tend to like, and that's because of how inefficient he was at the beginning of the year. But as we've seen him go through the past couple of weeks, he's steadily improving, you know, and that's all you can expect of a raw rookie receiver. And, you know, I think I'm always of the mind, especially as we get out of the bye weeks. In the bye weeks, you get depth tested. You know, your fantasy teams look at, you know, you have to have somebody to start when your starters go down or when your starters are resting, you know, so that's sort of that challenge. But as we get into the home stretch now, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think this is our last bye week, or do we have one or two more?
We have one more. We have one more bye week in week 11.
In week 11, that's right. So as we're coming out of this then, you know, you don't need to carry safe guys as much. You don't need to carry your Travis Benjamin's a bad example because he's got his own sort of upside to him. But your sort of high floor, low ceiling guys, you don't need to carry those anymore once we're coming out of the bye. The Marcus Wheatons or Andrew Hawkinses, you can drop them for guys like Dorial Green Beckham, who could go off for a mess of points in any week. And I think you're looking for upside at this point, and he presents that. And I'm totally down with picking that up.
Yeah, and I would have to think even if and when Kendall Wright comes back, despite him having a better season than he did last season, I have to think quickly Dorial Green Beckham could be someone that is trusted more than Kendall Wright. I remember, I think earlier in the season he had said he doesn't understand why he's not getting the ball as much or something like that, or that he's not getting enough targets. I think that was him. So who knows? Maybe he'll have one of those tangents again now that Dorial Green Beckham's on the scene. Want to talk about a tight end that I've been on for a few weeks, and no, it's not Gary Barnidge. Gary Barnidge should, you know, he's elevated to God status, but for this tight end, I should say, especially on the team that he's on, where nobody thought, oh my God, nobody's ever going to be this, you know, be able to produce this position since you know, Tony Gonzalez did. He's actually put up pretty good numbers, especially for a tight end, in the past, say, 5 games, since he was actually inactive for 1 game. So starting week 5, he actually started doing really well. Let's speak of Tammy. And I actually did a little bit of math here. Not as much as you guys do over numberFire, but I did a little math of my own. And in the past 5 games, including this past Sunday, Tammy has accumulated 32 receptions, 326 yards, and 1 touchdown on 43 targets. So on average, that breaks down to 6.4 receptions, 65.2 yards, and 1/5 of a touchdown, but on almost 9 targets. And I literally wrote here not bad numbers for tight end in the Falcons. I struggled with consistency since Tony Gonzalez retired. These past 2 weeks, we've seen Jacob Tamme be the number 2, if not number 3, at the worst option in that pass game. We talked about Matt Ryan a little bit. Even more shocking when you think he has an offensive line that has improved immensely, a better defense, Julio Jones, Devontae Freeman, and now Jacob Tamme. We can mention him. So that's even more shocking that he's not put up better numbers than we had hoped he would. But we didn't see sort of the Derek Carr sort of performance or Andy Dalton performance. But Jacob Tamme has quickly become a reliable target in Atlanta. He's been somebody that Matt Ryan throws to, that Kyle Shanahan wants the ball to. And especially when we've seen, players like Jordan Reed go down with an injury before. Jimmy Graham struggling with consistency. Antonio Gates suffering an injury plus being suspended. Ladarius Green being injured. Gary Barnes bursting onto the scene. It's just that position that's just crazy. And I would think that Jacob Tamme is just going to add to this fold even more. So enough about me. I think Jacob Tamme, though, is someone who you can pick up. And if you could pick up as a number 2 tight end, that's awesome. But especially with someone like, Antonio Gates on bye this week, Jacob Tamme could be a terrific plug-play guy. But what about you? What do you think about Jacob Tamme?
Yeah, Tammy's been the reliable safety blanket that he was for Peyton Manning all those years in Indianapolis too. I say all those years, and I actually don't know how many years. But
it was actually 1 year. I think Dallas Clark went down with an injury, and then Jacob Tamme did something.
and then he did a thing. He's been that Manning's safety blanket in Denver too for that one season. But it's that reliable sort of guy that you can turn to for checkdowns. And we know that Ryan's been struggling with getting the ball out deep recently. That actually, from what I know, from what I've seen, Julio Jones' route tree a little bit, so he's doing more comeback routes. So he'll go out 5-10 yards and then, curl and come back to catch the ball. He's not running deep routes anymore because for whatever reason, I don't know if it's the line being ineffective, whatever. The long game isn't working as much. Tamme is benefiting from that for sure. And that's not to say he's not good. He just isn't. He's not a high upside guy. And once you're into that back end group, as we talked about with DGB, once you're into that, out of the bye weeks here, I might pick up somebody more like Garrett Selleck, who really got lit up by Blaine Gabbert this past week in San Francisco. Guys like that who just have a little more oomph to their receiving game. But that's not to say that Tamme isn't good enough for a solid 3 to 5 point floor, and then he'll explode for, 10 for 103 and a touchdown against Tampa Bay. There will be those games. I just think at this point in his career, he's not even a Vernon Davis or any of those things. He's in a good situation, and right now it's really benefiting him. But I don't know, he's just a little blah for me.
Yeah, and he's not exactly the sex. No, he's no Gary Barnes, exactly. That's what I have to tell myself. He's not exactly the sexiest option out there. He's not. But I would think, especially with these numbers, and numbers don't lie, especially with a guy who works over at numberFire, he has been relied on, at least this past stretch of 5 games. Will that always continue, especially when we see Leonard Hankerson come back eventually? Maybe not. But I'm going to ride the wave while I can. I'm not going to go and start him in any leagues that, I have a Gary Barnes, a Greg Olsen, Tyler Eifert in, but I would think he's still a good guy to have on your bench, at least right now, if you have a spot open for a backup tight end. There are worse options out there.
And it's certainly something to note. That he's top 10 in targets among tight ends this year. So he's getting fed. He's getting the volume, and volume is really what you look for when you're looking at your back-end options. He's good enough,
Yeah, we just don't want him to turn into Mike Evans where he drops six times in one
right.
game. But that sort of will transition us a little bit into our starts and sits, at least this week. And I purposely left off a running back that should be talked about. I left him up because I'm actually going bold and saying he should be a must-start this week. Not just picked up a must-start, but we'll get to him in a little bit. So what we'll do here is we're going to start with the start section, start with the quarterback, and what we'll do is, we'll go over, who it is, why, is it the matchup, is it just how they've been doing. But I'll start first, and this is going to be for my quarterback. It's going to be a quarterback that, again, a lot of people didn't think he did very well in his rookie year, but he sort of turned it on at least a little bit more. Not as pretty as Derek Carr, but he's still putting up decent numbers and making some good decisions. That's Blake Bortles. He finished with 381 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's going to be that type of guy. He's going to throw a lot of interceptions, but he's going to throw the ball a lot. He's going to get a lot of touchdowns as well, concerning his playmakers. But he's facing Baltimore this week. They give up the second most points per game to quarterbacks this season. Baltimore, which I noted, has not gotten an interception since week 3. They have 3 interceptions on the whole season, and they haven't got one since week 3. Bortles, in the past 4 games, he has had 3 of them be 300 yards or more and 2 touchdowns or more. He's going to throw some interceptions. It's going to happen. But he's also put up good numbers in the interim. He's put up yards. He's put up touchdowns. And when you compare touchdowns and yards and interceptions, what's going to weigh more, the yards and the touchdowns? And he's got Allen Robinson. He's got Allen Hurns. I know he's in a boot, and I'm actually going to talk about him a little bit, but he's still, he's played through injuries. I think he'll play on Sunday. So for me this week, I'm going to say the must-start for quarterback is Blake Bortles. So now that you've seen how it goes, Joe, who is your must-start quarterback this week?
So I'm going to go a little bit deeper. I'm going to say especially for deeper leagues, or if you are a team that forgot to look at bye weeks and you have both, Matt Ryan and Phillip Rivers as your quarterbacks, and you're like, crap, what do I do? My start quarterback is a little bit deeper, and it's going to seem really unsexy, but Nick Foles of the St. Louis Rams. Now, here's the case against Nick Foles. He has not passed for more than 200 yards since week 1 this year. He has, he has 5 interceptions to, 7 touchdowns? That's not great. Oof. We know that offense runs through Todd Gurley, but he's playing the Chicago Bears defense this week. And Chicago, in numberFire's metrics, and you can find all this on the site. Got to keep plugging that numberFire there. With Chicago, they are 29th. That's 4th worst in the league in defensive passing value per play. So they're giving up the 4th most value to quarterbacks every play in the league. They've given up the 11th most points to quarterbacks this season. And, we've seen the big weeks have come from Aaron Rodgers, Carson Palmer, Matthew Stafford. But if a guy like Matthew Stafford, who's also a pocket presence guy, can put up 4 touchdowns and 400 yards on them, I'm going to say that Foles might be able to.
Yeah, and, anything can happen. Anything can happen. We saw Nick Foles somehow put up, 27 touchdowns, 2 interceptions a few years ago. And granted, it was with Philadelphia, but still, this guy, he's got a little bit of talent, right? And in a good matchup, you have to think he does pretty well.
Even in this year, he almost threw 300 and a touchdown on Seattle in week 1. And, it can be that. He can be that if called upon. You got to think they're going to try to run it through Gurley, but, if they need him, Foles might be a Hail Mary. So if you need a Hail Mary, go to a guy who can throw some Hail Marys. That's my motto.
Do you think he'll just throw it off to Wes Welker? Now, I'm 75% kidding here, but do you think all those people, oh my God, go pick up Wes Welker? Do you think he could possibly start tossing it a little bit to Wes Welker even this week to sort of fight the sort of stigma that he's just tossing it up in the air with Tavon Austin, who Tavon Austin's just inconsistent. So do you think, maybe Wes Welker helps or he probably won't, but I'll ask for the sake of asking.
I think Nick Foles is the kind of person who loves to play Madden, and anytime he makes a creative character, he goes strong arm pocket presence quarterback and just hurls it on 9 routes down the field. I think he just sends 5 wide receiver streaks, and he just throws it up every single time. I honestly, that's a tendency in a quarterback, and I don't know that you break that. And St. Louis has really embraced that this year with their passing game. They are going vertical instead of going horizontal, and it's helping because Gurley gets defenses to come down into the box, and then Foles can test them up top.
Yeah, it's just a perfect formula. I know, and you have to think, you sort of just told everybody what my Madden strategy is like, so I'll have to think of something new.
Sorry to reveal
but
it.
Yeah, no, thanks. So I just lost 5 games in that span. But I didn't think Wes Welker was much of an addition. He's going to take a few weeks to even learn the playbook. You can't. He's not New England Wes Welker. He's not 110 catches and somehow makes a play on every catch. It's not going to happen. So yeah, I mean Nick Foles, he's got a good matchup and he's got a solid run game with a solid defense. So who knows, especially in a good matchup. But moving on to the running backs, must-start running backs this week. Like I said, I purposely left someone out this week in our waiver wire talk because I'm going out being bold. This isn't a Hail Mary like you just brought out there. This is a bold pick, and that's James Starks. I'm telling you, not only pick him up, he is a must-start this week, and I'll tell you why. James Starks somehow accumulated over 100 yards, actually over 110 yards against Carolina this past weekend. And Carolina has quickly become what Detroit was last season, just a out-of-the-blue top 5 defense. And we've just seen Eddie Lacy do nothing this season. Do nothing. I think he's had 80 yards once this season. And it's sad because I actually advocated for him to be the number 1 pick in most drafts other than Le'Veon Bell. And it's just been a year of first-round running backs, just disappointing. Don't even get me started on C.J. Anderson. Don't ask, Joe. Don't ask. But James Starks had this totally sexy matchup this week. In half-point PPR leagues, which is, what I mostly do, they've given up the 4th most points. Detroit is. That's who he's facing this week. The 4th most points to running backs this season per game in half PPR leagues. They've given up 12 rushing touchdowns in 8 games this season. That is 1.5 or 1.5 touchdowns.
Yep.
1.5 touchdowns per game. So every 2 games, that's 3 rushing touchdowns. 2 running backs. He has consistently outperformed Eddie Lacy. Now, granted, James Starks has done his damage in the receiving game for the most part, but he also can prove to run. And I think that Green Bay, coming off of two consecutive losses, is going to come out guns blazing against the lowly Detroit Lions. So I'm saying that James Starks. I was supposed to be for dramatic effect. I can't afford a sound guy. So, but James Starks, yeah, exactly. James Starks, I love his matchup this week. I think he's going to get much more touches than Eddie Lacy, who also, I guess, injured his groin, but that's sort of an afterthought to just how everything's been going so far. James Starks is my must-start running back this week. What about you, Joe? Can you top that? Can you top that?
I love that. That's a good call. I wrote about how the Packers defense was really good a couple weeks back, and then all of a sudden their rush defense, I wrote about their defense. Actually, somebody came up with a Detroit article recently too that talked about how bad their defense has been. Sorry, I was thinking of in reverse. But no, I have another bold call. I'm not sure it's as bold as that, but I am hoping it's a good one. I'm going a little bit different here, especially in even half PPR leagues and especially PPR leagues. But Charles Sims is my guy. Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's the change of pace to Doug Martin. He's been one of those guys that's used not as frequently as he probably should be based on his talent. We've seen Doug Martin's resurgence this year, and that's awesome. But Sims has lead back capability, and I really would love it if the Buccaneers went even more run heavy. Now I say that even as a Mike Evans owner, but I would love it if they use Sims and Martin all the time. It's a blast to see those two together. But Sims, I think, especially this week against Dallas, is going to be really great. Dallas is the third worst team in defensive rushing prevention by numberFire's metrics. They give up the second most points to running backs in the league in half PPR leagues. And on top of that, they give up the third most receiving yards to running backs in the NFL. And that's important to me because Sims does primarily get work as a receiving back. Dallas gave up, points to Shane Vereen in week 1, gave up a mess of yards through the air to Devontae Freeman, DeMarco Murray, Spiller took 20 points on them almost. Deion Lewis put up 20 points on them in week 5, and then DeMarco Murray again in week 9. I really think that Charles Sims could be a sneaky good flex play this week, and he himself has been 22nd among running backs in total value on a per-play basis this season. So that would be my guy, that if you're looking for a good flex play or a running back too, Charles Sims is your guy.
And that pains me as someone who just acquired Doug Martin, but you can't lie with numberFire's metrics. You can't beat them. So I got to listen to you here. But moving on to the start wide receiver. Now, this is the guy I said I would talk about him later in the show. And granted, he's in a boot right now, but I still expect him to play this weekend, considering he's been playing with an injury all season, basically. Under the radar a little bit, but he's been playing with an injury. That's Allen Hurns. Like his teammate, Blake Bortles, I'm calling him a must-start this week. He has scored in 5 straight games, 5 touchdowns in 5 games. He went for 122 yards and a touchdown on 5 catches against New York. That Jets secondary. But he's facing Baltimore, and Baltimore's just been atrocious. Baltimore, that's fantasy football heaven, that defense. But they're giving up the second most points per game to wide receivers in half PPR leagues. He has, like I said, literally the first thing, scored in 5 straight games. He has 44 targets over the past 5 games. That's just below 9 per game. And Baltimore has given up 14 receiving touchdowns to wide receivers in 8 games this season. That is almost 2 a game. So you could give one to Allen Robinson and give one to Allen Hurns. Why not? But Allen Hurns, I expect him to play this weekend. He's in a boot, but he's dealt with this injury for a while. I don't expect him to miss this game, and I expect him to have another great game. So that's my pick this week for my must-start. What about you, Joe?
My guy is on the exact flip side of this matchup. So a lot of people only found out his name this past week or the week before, when Steve Smith went down for the season. But Kamar Aiken is the number 1 wide receiver in Baltimore now. And he's been bouncing on and off my redraft teams because of the injuries to Smith, and he'll, light it up one game and then do nothing when Smith comes back in. But his Week 8 performance against the Chargers without Smith for most of it, he went 6 for 62. That's a solid line, especially if you're in a PPR format. 12 points is nothing to sniff at. He hasn't had a huge touchdown year yet, but he's got a solid profile. He's 6'2", 215, and good enough to get himself down the field. They occasionally will take shots to him. With that, again, we go to Jacksonville, the matchup. Jacksonville, by numberFire's metrics, has given up the third most passing points per play. So you're looking at Flacco, who loves to sling it. You're looking at Trestman, who's got the offensive coordinator, has a great offensive scheme, and they're going to be feeding the ball to Kamar Aiken. And I think he has, at least 10 targets this week against the Jaguars.
Yeah, you'd have to think so, especially just given who else is there. There's nobody else. So definitely. So we have 10 more players to talk about, 5 more on each side, and we have 10 minutes left. So we're going to go a little bit quicker. Not number fire, but rapid fire. See what I did there? So my must start tight end this week is going to be Jordan Reed. Now, granted, he's probably going to be starting in most leagues, but I'm going to tell you why he's a must start. Facing New Orleans, they've given up the most points to tight ends per game in 0.5 PPR leagues this season. He has 3 touchdowns in the past 2 games, 14 catches as well, and New Orleans has given up the most yards and 3rd most touchdowns to tight ends this season. Especially with, Deshaun Jackson back. That's great. Awesome. But even still against New England, which was a tough matchup for Jordan Reed, he still scored a touchdown. So I just like him a lot this week, especially given this matchup and given that you're going to be without Jacob Tamme, Kobe Fleener or Dwayne Allen, who haven't done much but still, and then Antonio Gaines as well. So I think he's a must-start this week, given the matchup and just given how he's done since he came back. What about you, though, Joe?
My guy would be Eric Ebron, again, starting in that Green Bay-Detroit matchup. Green Bay is in the bottom half of defensive passing value on a per-play basis, and on top of that, they've given up a lot of points to tight ends this year. We don't realize it because we think of Oakland and New York, the Giants, as the best starts against tight ends, but the Packers gave up a lot of points to Bennett, Kelsey, Ladarius Green, who's also more in that same tier as Ebron of talent. They even gave up 3 for 61 to Virgil Green and 3 for 44 to Owen Daniels in Week 8. I really think that Ebron could be on a boom week this week.
Yeah, and just given all the hype coming into the season, maybe he should get one of those every now and then. But going over to the sit side now, we're going to go through this really quick. For my quarterback this week, I'm going to tell people to sit Jay Cutler this week. Facing St. Louis, they've given up the 2nd most points per game this season to quarterbacks. St. Louis has not given up a passing touchdown since Week 5, which is 3 games. And they still have I think I wrote a solid run defense. I don't know why, but they have a solid run defense, which the only reason I could think of that is because it would shut down Jeremy Langford and just force Cutler to have to pass a lot, which they'll be ready for. But yeah, I would not start Jay Cutler this week in a tough matchup, especially when they haven't given up a passing touchdown the past 3 games. What about you for your must-sit quarterback this week?
This one is really big, really bold, especially in a bye week. But I went with Carson Palmer. A lot of people are, really high on the Carson Palmer love, and they should be. He's been fantastic this year. He's going up against the Seattle Seahawks, who are still a really good defense. He hasn't played them yet this year, but Seattle is 5th in defensive value prevented on a per-play basis this year. They've given up the 3rd fewest points to quarterbacks this year. Part of that was bad quarterbacks like Nick Foles. Well, I guess Foles went off against them too. But Clausen, Stafford, Kaepernick, Castle, those kind of guys, those were half of their starts. But they've given up huge weeks to Dalton, Newton, Foles, and Rodgers. I mean, it's a little bit of a long shot, but if you're worried about the matchup, if you are a very matchup-based person, I'd say you can find a better start than Palmer in that sense.
Yeah, just facing Seattle, that usually just comes with an instant ping of fear. So we'll see. But my must-sit running back this week, now not Carlos Williams, but LaShawn McCoy, I'm going to must-sit this week. Facing New York, the Jets, I should say, give up the fewest points to running backs in half PPR leagues per game this season. He is playing hurt. Whether he plays or not, he'll be playing hurt. I had to look into what I wrote. It's a short week. Carlos Williams is doing well, and the Jets have only given up 3 combined touchdowns. I think it was 2 rushing and 1 receiving, 2 running backs all season. Hate this matchup on a short week when you're injured. Carlos Williams, of course, will run for 200, but LaShawn McCoy will do nothing. I do not like him this week against the Jets. So what about you? Who's your must-sit running back this week?
This is another one that I'm sure everyone's high on, but Jeremy Langford's everyone's favorite new shiny toy, and I think you got to sit him this week. We saw him go off against the bad Chargers rush defense, but he gets the St. Louis Rams, who you just said have a really strong potential to shut him down. They're 5th in defensive rushing value prevented per play. They have given up the 19th most points to running backs this year, but half of their games were against Marshawn Lynch, Le'Veon Bell, Adrian Peterson, like clearly super talented guys. Jeremy Langford is not in that tier of talent. I think you got to bench him.
Yeah, and I'm trying to trade him wherever I can, which is 2 leagues. So I definitely agree with that sentiment. But my must-sit wide receiver, going off of what you said about Carson Palmer, Larry Fitzgerald is my must-sit this week. Facing Seattle, they've given up the fewest points to wide receivers per game this season in a half PPR league. Likely shadowed by Richard Sherman. Seattle has given up 1 receiving touchdown and 1 receiving touchdown all season by wide receivers, and also only 100 yards to wide receivers per game. All wide receivers, I should say. So a little under 800, I believe, actually. Horrible matchup this week. I don't like it. I think that, we're going to see more Michael Floyd, which could possibly, get Carson Palmer going. Larry Fitz might just be a shadow. And who knows about John Brown. So Larry Fitz, sit him this week. Don't like him. What about you for your wide receiver?
That I'm going to just throw my money into the same hat. I was also looking up Larry Fitzgerald here. Just to throw an extra stat on there, numberFire is, again, defensive passing NEP per play. Seattle is 5th at preventing the pass. So that's a bad matchup. They're going to key on Fitzgerald, who's been great this year. Sit him.
Yeah, there's just not much more you can put to it. Just based out of respect and how he's the number 1 receiver, Richard Sherman will probably cover him.
Yep.
And, besides him, there's no other – I haven't seen really any quarterbacks do that well for Seattle. And granted, they have solid play from Cam Chancellor, who's really helped a lot. And then, I can't think of the other safety's name. If there is another one.
Earl Thomas.
There might not. Earl Thomas, thank you. But yeah, no, I just don't like it this week. No, not at all for Larry Fitz. And then lastly, our sit tight ends this week. This is the 3rd time this guy's on my list, and I just don't like him. Jimmy Graham is someone I'm telling people to sit this week. Coming off a bye, facing Arizona, they've given up, so on the flip side of this actually, they've given up the 3rd fewest points per game to tight ends in a half PPR league. They have given up 1 touchdown to tight ends all season. In half of Jimmy Graham's games, he has actually scored under 5 points in half PPR league. So in half of his games, he has went under 5 points. He's really inconsistent, and he has a bad matchup this week. Don't like it at all. What about you for your must-sit tight end this week, Joe?
I don't know how many people are starting him at this point in the year, but Julius Thomas is my shutdown guy. He's got to be just on so many painkillers. He's had a hand injury, a groin injury, an abdomen injury. On top of that, the passing defense for Baltimore is bottom half of the league, but most of that is to wide receivers. They rank 2nd in the league in points allowed to wide receivers. We talked about that with Hearns, but they have the 2nd fewest allowed to tight ends. Bortles is going to take shots downfield. He's not going to worry about the underneath game.
Yeah, so, Baltimore has surprisingly been good against the tight end this season. But that'll do it for us here. We got about 30 seconds left, so I'll plug some stuff. Make sure to follow Joe here on Twitter at JR, that's ARR_FF on Twitter. Be sure to follow me on Twitter, DMoreNFL. Be sure to follow numberFire if you're not already, numberFire on Twitter. Be sure to follow the NickelPressTV, and I'll also catch a new episode of Hanging Einstein on our YouTube page. That'll do it for us here this week. Have a great week, everybody.